Hello, everyone. Welcome back to EMI Professional Development Series by NTU. I'm Dr. Gina Wenjing Chen. Well, in this episode, we'll be looking into the use of Formulaic language for listening and speaking in EMI classroom. Well, last time in episode 1, we have already done the introductions of Formulaic language, specifically Formulaic expressions and the routines. And then we also learned about the 4 different categories by functions in academic discourse. Today, we're going to start with a little bit recap and moving on to the specific applications and the training for listening and speaking in EMI classroom with more use of Formulaic language. Last time, we have already talked about the way we can apply Formulaic language and the importance of it. After learning about the 4 categories of Formulaic expressions, I figure we could look into more examples to really review the language functions of each type. The first one, stance expressions. It allows us to express attitudes or certainties of ideas. The second one, discourse organizers. It helps us reflect the relationship between 2 ideas, 2 items, 2 issues, or between the concept that's been mentioned earlier and the upcoming ones. The third type, which we use very often when reference certain text or reference a passage to emphasize a particular point or to narrow down the scope of a subject or domain. The fourth type will be classroom English we use to facilitate or mediate our class task. Well, with a quick review of the definitions for each category, now we can look into more examples and see if you can identify which category these expressions belong to. Did you get it right? Shouldn't be that difficult, right? So take a look at the first group. First example, it cannot be right to do something when you can do something else instead. Well, you can tell from my tone of voice, 这是一种态度，一种口气啊，所以它应该是 stance expression. Well, the second one, the example here, so the principle there was the same on something that's been mentioned earlier. 所以要用过去已经讲过的东西，然后来串联我现在要讲的想法，那就是一种组织串联的功能。So it's discourse organizer. The third group, well, data from sometimes someone or something or certain book shows the following. So you're citing, you're referencing a passage or statistics, right? So that's referential expressions. And the fourth one should be the easiest one. You're facilitating how the class proceeds. 所以这是教学互动的。Here's our first question, second question. Well, let's take a poll. 所以这样子的一个分类应该已经很清楚咯。Apparently, it takes deliberate practice for us to master in Formulaic language. However, the more we practice, the easier time we'll have when putting our presentations together, lecture together in EMI classroom. The same thing we do for our students, we model for them. When we use a lot of the Formulaic language in our classroom, students can pick them up, and then they will start using the expressions as well when they're interacting with us. When giving lectures, forming group discussions or classroom discussions or give classroom presentations, Formulaic expressions serve as important roles in listening and speaking activities. Formulaic language serves as signposting language to signal all the language functions for intended meaning. Well, since it is so powerful, how do we raise students' awareness of Formulaic language? How do we teach them explicitly, help them identify different language functions for different expressions, and even model it for them and have them practice in their output? The following activity I designed is actually a way for students to raise their awareness, understanding the use of formulaic expressions. Take this worksheet I put together for example. This worksheet that I designed can be a standalone assignment or a small segment of a project. Most of the time when we ask the students to watch an online video as a course supplementary, we rarely ask them to pay attention to linguistic resources from the speaker. Well, in addition to have them listen to the content or the information from the speech, we can also ask the students to jot down some useful expressions that the presenters use to express their stance, their attitudes, to organize their ideas, to cite references or interact with the audience. Once they jot down some notes, they can also go to some useful corporate sites. For example, my personal favorite among all of these is Mika's. When we go to Mika's homepage, Mika's developed by University of Michigan. This is a very credible corpus that students can use. Students can type in whatever expressions they found and verify it with Mika's. They use this as a search engine to make sure whatever they found is correct and valid. So this Mika's is a very useful tool and is free for the students. We can also turn the worksheet into something students can collaborate with each other. They should discuss with each other before they submit the work. Can they actually do it? Of course, look at what my students have submitted. They did perfect work. And by completing the worksheet, they managed to turn the input into intake. They started to have the awareness of some useful expressions, which might come in handy in their later presentation. When we guide the students to analyze the linguistic resources from a speaker as a model, we can also show students how the formulaic language can be part of the presentation strategy, and we can do the analysis together. For example, we can see a lot of the guiding questions here. How did the presenter prepare the audience for the presentation? How did he engage the audience? How did he stress on the keywords or key ideas? By using all different kinds of expressions. How did he make sure key points stick? How did he make sure he's heard and all that? Once students go through the question listed here, they will be able to know what kind of expressions should be used to achieve certain language function. In my class, students chose Steve Jobs as the presentation model. Well, when we look closely at his speech, we can also see that he used a lot of the formulaic expressions in his presentation. Today is the day I've been looking forward to. This is an attitude, this is a stance. Or the first one is the second one is, and the third one is, so three things. So these are the discourse organizers. Are you getting it? Well, this is a facilitative phase. That's like category 4. So basically, these useful expressions can really help Steve Jobs to keep the audience's attention and then bring the audience together along the presentation that they have prepared. In the market, there are lots of toolbooks. In this one, there are lots of the formulaic expressions, useful expressions listed for readers to use. For the students, they don't really have to buy the book. As a matter of fact, by collecting the expressions themselves, they learn the formulaic language in context. Up to this point, with regard to formulaic language, we have really learned to identify expressions and also categorize them by their functions. Next, we're going to take a leap of faith by turning intake to output. Well, in order to do this, I actually have the students to do a little impersonation task. Students can choose and emulate whoever they prefer on the internet in terms of the professionals' presentations, and then practice them to incorporate all the useful expressions with the proper body language and facial expressions with tone of voice. The following footage is submitted by my student. The first half of the 30 seconds was the presentation model he chose and emulated. And the second half of the 30 seconds was his impersonation.
And yeah, for me, there ain't no need to flavor the milk, okay? The sugar is in everything. I know all those ins and outs of those ingredients, okay? There's in everything. Now, even the milk today cannot escape from the modern day problem. Now, here's the milk. Here's our carton. Inside this, there are as sugar as your favorite fizzy pop, and they're having 2 a day. Now, let me show you. We've got a kid here. Now, they're having 8 tablespoons of sugar a day. Now look, there's your week. There's your month. And I believe we're putting in just 5 years of elementary school sugar, just from milk.
Didn't Dave do a really good job? Not only that he successfully impersonated the speaker, but also he used the right tone of voice to correspond to the language function in order for him to memorize and interpret the formulaic expressions. I'm very proud of him, actually. I'm sure in the future he'll be able to use all these expressions in the presentations as well. Other than the impersonation task, there's one more task I find really useful to train students to describe infographics. Some of the expressions are necessary when we describe statistics or graphs. Well, this kind of supplementary materials everywhere on YouTube, as long as you type in describe graphs in English or how to talk about charts and graphs in English, this kind of materials will pop out right away. One of my favorites includes a lot of the expressions as well as useful words when giving detailed descriptions regarding the changes of curves and also distributions in the pie charts. Well, if we ask the students just to watch the video, their memory tends to fade away very, very fast. So I put the handout together, highlighting some of the useful vocabulary as well as expressions for them to really tackle the details of different fluctuations, different changes of shapes of the trend lines. Once the students get a hang of the content of the video supplementary, as well as the vocabulary expressions provided in the handouts, they'll be given this ultimate challenge, market analysis. In this task, I asked the students to work with numbers and come up with a proposal for the company. Now they have to incorporate whatever they have learned from the handout, from the video, and do a presentation. In the following footage, students successfully demonstrate their intake and then turn into output. Let's hear it.
According to the data from 3 branches, the total sales of shoes in Gongguan and Ximending were 1,200 pairs, accounting for 86% of total sales in a week. So our main markets will be in Gongguan and Ximending. As Amy mentioned before, our target customers are teenager and young adults, which are the orange one and the gray one in the pie chart. And the proportion of 2 groups buying shoes were 65% and 85% respectively in Gongguan and Ximending. Next, let's take a look at the purchase quantity of 2 groups. Firstly, the teenager brought 112 pairs of Nike and 110 pairs of Adidas. There's no big difference in this part. And then for young adults, they brought 165 pairs of Adidas, but only 40 pairs of Nike. For that, which can be inferred that one of our target customers, young adults, they have a higher degree of preference for Adidas. And when comparing to the 2 different kinds of shoes, it would say that basketball shoes has a high attrition rate. So therefore it has a high elimination rate.
Through the contextualized practice, students are likely to successfully incorporate these expressions in their future presentations or academic discussions with the peers. If market analysis doesn't fit your discipline, we can also have students to look into the real-world data, such as this one from our government's website, and turn the data into infographics and have them present them. The QR code is attached to these slides for your information. In this episode, we started with raising students' awareness, and through explicit teaching of formulaic language, we guide students to identify the use of different kinds of expressions. They can learn from the experts, presenters, and then use the modeling as their initial output, and later turn the intake into the presentation as the ultimate practice. Now we understand how powerful formulaic language is. We can also know that having students to consciously learn about these expressions is a way to empower them in the listening and speaking task in EMI classroom. In the next episode, we'll use formulaic language in the context of reading and writing tasks in EMI classroom. Thanks for watching.